Good evening. I hope I'm loud enough. Yes, I am now. Okay. It's a pleasure and an honor to introduce Dr. Nancy Creaghead. For over 30 years, Dr. Creaghead, as a speech and language pathologist and a child language specialist, has devoted her life to ensuring that all children develop language proficiency, because good language ability is the base for learning how to read and write. In the college classroom, as a private practitioner, and as a leader in the professions, Dr. Creaghead has taught her students, collaborated with her peers on how to help children be ready for school, in other words, ready to become literate. She has developed methods and programs to train teachers, parents, and administrators in early childhood programs such as Head Start, and help them in how to create a language learning enriched environment. Because of her work in literacy, this past year, Dr. Creaghead was invited to represent speech-language pathologists and audiologists at a White House conference on early cognitive development called Ready to Read, Ready to Learn. Under her leadership, the National Association for Speech-Language Pathologists and Audiologists has chosen literacy to be one of the focused initiatives for 2002. Her passion is to assure that children of poverty come to school prepared to learn how to read and write. Too many children in poverty lack exposure to books and people who read. Statistics repeatedly tell the story that the inability to read is correlated with school dropout and school failure. The impact of the lack of print on language and cognitive development in young children is staggering, and it affects all of their lives. In the movie The Mighty, which was in Fort Wayne a few years ago, the hero of the story is a young man who is disabled and was ostracized. He makes the statement that no person needs to be left out or held back if she or he can read. Because, he says, books are the window to what can be. Seeing what can be has been the passion that Dr. Creaghead has used to keep working with Head Start and her students to help them learn that language is paired with literacy. Dr. Creaghead has earned her degrees from Denison University, from her own Purdue University, the University of Cincinnati. She has published widely and presented workshops to a variety of professionals. In addition to being a respected academic, a professor and chair of the Communication Sciences and Disorders Department at the University of Cincinnati, Dr. Creaghead has earned the admiration of her peers through her leadership and service commitments. She has been honored by several professional organizations for her scholarship and for her leadership. She is currently serving as the elected president of her national association, which is over 108,000 members. At the core of her leadership is the recognition that collaborative efforts result in meaningful and positive changes. We'll hear more about those efforts in her lecture. Please join me in welcoming Nancy Creaghead to Fort Wayne and also to Indiana.
You need to do something with the light.
You're on.
Oops, I failed again. All right, just give me 1 minute to get hooked up here and to get the lights right. And I think I'm in charge of the lights, is that right? I'm not sure here. Okay. I need some help on, should I do something to get this up? So that I can see the screen. And are we on? Am I doing something wrong? I may need some help here. Should be coming up?
Yes.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, now I can say hello and thank you for inviting me and how wonderful it is to be here. This is really a special treat for me to be invited here, partly because of I have some connection to Indiana through my master's degree at Purdue. And it's just been a treat to spend the day last evening meeting some of you and having a nice reception, and also the day being able to see your beautiful campus and meet some of the leaders of your campus. And I really, really appreciate the hospitality of the department and the faculty in the department for inviting me here, and also thank you to Dr. Hess for the lovely introduction. I hope that we're going to spend a nice amount of time, about 45 minutes or an hour tonight, talking about literacy, and I really very much appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts about literacy with you. So again, thank you for inviting me, and let's spend some time talking about literacy. It is my strict policy to always buy a book for a baby shower. Even if I'm buying other gifts or going in on a stroller and a crib and a playpen, I'm still going to buy a book. So I had to go to a baby shower last week, and as I was on my way to lunch in the hospital environment in which I actually work, our program is in a hospital or medical center environment, I was walking down the hall and I found a book sale. What luck. So I stopped there and I perused every single children's book that was there to find the absolute perfect one to take to this baby shower. And I looked at all of them to be sure that I could find one that met my criteria of a good book that would promote emergent literacy. It had to have interesting pictures that helped to tell the story. It had to have one simple sentence per page to read with the child. It had to have repetition to promote predicting, and it had to have rhyming to promote phonological awareness. So I found the book, The Night is an Animal, there at this bookstore. And I'll just read you just a couple of lines from The Night is an Animal. The night is like an animal that nibbles on the day. Everywhere it takes a bite, the sky turns dark and gray. Night eats until the day is done and breathes a happy sigh, which starts the evening breezes and blows the moon up high. The night is like an animal turning round to quench its thirst. Night finds the Milky Way. It laps a little milk before coming back down to stay. Well, I like this book, so I went to buy it. And I was always buying the book. The saleswoman said, "Did a doctor tell you to buy that book?" Well, I was taken a little aback, and I said, "No, I looked at every single book, and I picked out this book myself as the right book." And she said, "Well, there was this lady doctor here earlier today, and she bought that book, and she was telling everyone that they should buy this book." So I thought, well, I'm a lady doctor, and I know something about books, but I'm assuming in this hospital environment, if I didn't have a white coat on, I wasn't a real lady doctor. And only in this environment, it would be the real lady doctor who knows what a good book is. But this story is really not about who calls who a doctor. This story is about the joys and privileges and benefits of a literate society where a lady doctor who's on her way to or from lunch, or on her way perhaps to or from saving a life, could find joy in stopping to pick out a wonderful children's book and tell other people about how much she liked it. This culture is in stark contrast to the culture of poverty that is described in the research of Susan Newman, the United States Department of Education Undersecretary for Elementary and Secondary Education, and by the authors Hart and Risley in the book Meaningful Differences. Tonight, I'm going to talk some about those issues involved in literacy in a culture which promotes it, and literacy in many of the places in the United States today where we find poverty. Susan Newman, in her research, examined the literacy opportunities in a variety of neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And one thing that she did in this research was to go into the neighborhoods and look at what the literacy opportunities were. She worked with 10 urban anthropology students in looking at 4 communities in Philadelphia. And what these researchers did was just to go out on the street and wander around looking at what was there. They studied 2 middle-class neighborhoods and 2 low-income neighborhoods. One of the things they did was to look at what kinds of opportunities there were to access books. One of the middle-class neighborhoods was a blue-collar, primarily immigrant neighborhood, working class, and many of the individuals were of Russian, Polish, and Irish descent. In that neighborhood, the researchers found 13 different places to buy books. Now these places were all kinds of places. They might have been bookstores or drugstores or grocery stores or department stores, whatever. 13 different places in this neighborhood. And there were 2,157 different children's book titles that they found in these places to buy books. And that averaged out to be 3 different books per child. Then they went into a second middle-class neighborhood, and this was described as having old money. It was a well-integrated neighborhood, 33% African American, 50% Caucasian, and other international individuals. And it happened to be a university neighborhood. And near a university, and many of the individuals worked in the university or were students there. In that place, they found 11 places where you could buy children's books, very similar to the other neighborhood. But the number of titles was incredibly different. There were 16,000 different children's book titles in those 11 stores, and more of which were bookstores actually than in the other place. And that averaged out to 12 titles per child. And then they went and they looked in the low-income neighborhoods, 2 low-income neighborhoods. The first one was one that was pretty evenly divided, 1/3 Hispanic, 1/3 Caucasian, 1/3 African American. And in contrast to the middle-class neighborhoods, there were only 4 places to buy books in this, and as you can see, subsequently the other neighborhood also. But here, in comparison to the 16,000 different book titles, there were only 358 different children's books. And the ratio is reversed because now we have only 1 book per 16 children instead of the previous 12 per child. And then when we looked in an even more poverty, low-income neighborhood, there were again 4 places to buy books, drugstores, convenience stores, grocery stores, but there were only 33 different books in all of those places, which meant, in comparison to the child population in that neighborhood, that there was only 1 different book for every 353 children. So that the opportunities in these neighborhoods for families to buy books for their children, to have books readily at hand, to have different books with different kinds of information, with different vocabulary, with different things to interest children, is incredibly different for the low-income neighborhoods and the middle-class neighborhoods. Well, she looked at one other thing, too. In addition, she looked at the signs of illiteracy in the community, and I've just made some examples. In her talk which she gave at the White House Conference on Literacy, she showed us signs that she had photographs that she had ever actually taken in the neighborhood. But these are the kinds of examples. These happen to be Cincinnati signs that are in my neighborhood. And what you can see in these signs that are related to the stores of which they represent is that they offer an opportunity for children to see in print what they would find in those stores and to relate that to what moms and adults talk about and also to what they would find in there. So the child has an opportunity, the mom has an opportunity to talk with the child about what you find in a bakery, and the child has the opportunity to see the word bakery and learn what a bakery is. In the same way that we can talk about ice cream and the child learns the word and what it means and what they're going to find there and then relates it to the print of ice cream. And then in addition to that, in addition to learning those words, in the sterling cut glass one and in the shoe world, you have even higher level concepts that children can learn. I mean, what is sterling cut glass? What is cut glass? Is that broken glass? That's what you might think it is, but it isn't but it isn't broken glass. What is a cut glass bowl? And children, preschool children, have the opportunity to learn those kinds of things when they're exposed to that environment. And the same thing with shoe world. Not only we learn the word shoe, which would be a concrete, important word for the child to be able to read early on, but what is a shoe world? What is the idea of the fact of a place that would have so many shoes in it that you would call it a shoe world? In contrast to those kinds of things in the middle class neighborhood, the pictures, the photographs that Susan Newman showed from the low income had things that looked like this, graffiti, with no opportunity for the child to see what print looks like. And then also things like this, where you may have print associated with or covered with graffiti. And down here at the bottom, I tried in my computer graffiti to put some initials too. But what you see here is the mixing up of symbols that are meaningful and symbols that have no meaning at all, and in some cases, the lack of meaningful symbols altogether, so that you have a greatly reduced opportunity for children to learn what print is about. Okay, so having told those two stories, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the implications of what she found. Susan Newman's implications are that limited access to books means limited vocabulary and limited information. And limited information leads to slower schema and concept and organizational development, less learning. And then that limited information, the limited information networks that you need to be a literate person and to make sense of what you read, then leads to slower access to new information, and then avoidance of written information sources, and ultimately reliance on opinion leaders instead of self-gained information from print to make decisions. So tonight, what I'm going to be talking about, and have already been talking about, are these issues. First of all, the extent of the literacy problem, especially in a culture of poverty. And I'm going to give you some more information and statistics and facts about that. And then what we know about how literacy develops. Then the relationship between spoken language and literacy development, which is why I'm here, I guess, talking about literacy, because as a speech-language pathologist, it's that spoken language piece that started me in the path looking at literacy. And then finally, or next, the critical role of adult support, interaction, and modeling in supporting literacy development. And finally, and you can see I have question marks here, what must be done, because I'm not going to be able to give any answers on that one, but at least some suggestions. Okay, so let's talk about some more information about the extent of the literacy problem, and especially the effects of poverty on that. We know that 17 to 20% of our nation's children have substantial problems learning to read. A child who is not a fluent reader by 4th grade is likely to be a struggling reader into and throughout adulthood. In 4th grade, 41% of all American boys and 35% of girls read below the basic level, and in low-income urban schools, this figure approaches 70%. 75% of school dropouts report difficulty in learning to read, most all of them, and 79% of prisoners score in the 2 lowest literacy levels. So what we see here is a continuum of beginning with difficulty in learning to read and ending with the social consequences of that. Am I standing in the wrong place? Perhaps if I stand over here. Okay. as Dr. Hess mentioned, I've had the opportunity this year as ASHA president to go to a number of really exciting conferences. One conference that I was able to go to, which was sponsored by the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Reed Lyon, who is a director, a branch manager in the Division of Maternal and Child Health, presented some information. And he told us that 5% of children actually learn to read without instruction at all. And 30% of children learn to read easily when they're provided with instruction when they start school, but 60% find learning to read a challenge. And 20 to 30% really struggle with reading throughout their school age. And Joe Ferguson, who is a researcher at the University of Kansas, adds that 5% of children have such severe difficulty in learning to read that they're probably not going to be able to learn to read, even with special instruction. Reed Lyon said it's clear that reading success or failure can be predicted before kindergarten, and I'm going to talk about some other evidence of that, that based on language skills and pre-literacy, emergent literacy skills, we can already predict which children are going to be successful. Poor reading in first grade, reading ability in first grade typically persists into young adulthood. In the previous slide, we were talking about fourth grade, and now Reed Lyon is saying that it's even first grade that we can predict this. And it results in low self-esteem, low self-concept, low motivation to learn, to read, or to go to school, and ultimately, perhaps school dropout. Students say they hate to read because it's so hard, and one student that Reed Lyon talked to said, "I'd rather have a root canal than read." Another person who presented, who talked at the White House Conference on Literacy in August of 2001 that I was able to attend, talked about her research with families. And first of all, she presented some more statistics. 50% of kindergartners are from families with one or more risk factors for reading failures. And those risk factors include social, economic, physical risk factors in the home. She further reports that 33% of those children with only one risk factor will be in the bottom 25th percentile for reading scores. And she found, or stated, that scaffolding language and literacy experiences is a critical factor that is likely to be missing in these at-risk homes. So she actually studied interactions between mothers and children to look at what was happening in some of these at-risk homes and what might be an even better predictor of what we could find with children's success in reading. Her research regarding the responsiveness of mothers to their young children looked at mother and child interaction in infancy as defined as 6 to 24 months, and then in preschool as defined as 3 to 4 years. And she taped mothers, went in the homes and taped many mothers and their children. And from this vast numbers of taping, she found that there were 3 really clear clusters of how the mothers grouped in regard to their responsiveness to their children. And there were those who were consistently responsive throughout the entire period, both periods, both infancy and young and preschool age. She found that there were some mothers who were not responsive, who had low responsiveness during both periods. And then there was another group who were responsive during one period, one or the other period, and not the other. She looked then at those children's readiness for kindergarten. And what she found was that only those mothers or those children whose mothers were responsive during both periods were the average range in regard to kindergarten readiness when they hit kindergarten. So that those children who had mothers that were responsive in early infancy time and in the preschool time were really not different from those whose mothers were not responsive in either time. And these children were below average in kindergarten readiness. And she also found in another study and looking further at these families, that parenting at ages 6 through 8 did not really predict additional variance, and so that didn't make a difference, that the quality of parenting during that entire infancy and preschool age was so critical that trying to reverse that and having better parenting at 6 to 8 did not really improve children's readiness for children's school skills. I'm going to tell you a little story that I have in regard to looking at mothers and children and their responsiveness and ability to provide this kind of scaffolding that Susan Landry said is so important. And Susan Landry actually is a person in Texas who does a lot of research in Head Start and has a wonderful Head Start program and parent intervention program there. I was in a home several years ago recording or looking at a child who had elective mutism, a Head Start 3-year-old who did not talk in school at all, never once. And so myself and a student were going in the home because the mother reported that the child did talk at home and talked at the home rather normally, and we had never ever seen the child talk. So as we were in this home, we went in the home several times, and it was a home that was pretty much devoid of any books or resources for children to play with. There were several children in the home, and each time we went, we would take a book. And the one day that I'm going to describe, when we took this book in, and the child and the mother actually curled up on the couch, and they were reading together, and this child did talk with her mother, and it was really a wonderful kind of experience to see the mother and the child curling up and having this interaction. But as the mother was reading the book, I was noticing that she was going through and she was pointing to the pictures, and she was talking about, the book was Peter Pan, sorry, the book was Peter Pan, and she was talking about the boy, she was talking the boy climbing out the window, and she was talking about the pirate and pointing out the boat, and pointing out, and I'm sorry, she didn't call him a pirate, she pointed out the man with the hat, and she was pointing out the boat, and then she pointed and she said, and look at the fairy, and all of a sudden it became clear to me that not only could this mother not read this book, that she was telling the story to the child with the pictures, but that she didn't know the story of Peter Pan. And it was this clue when she didn't call it Tinkerbell, and she didn't call him Peter Pan, and she didn't call him a pirate, that I realized that she was making up this story or really pointing to pictures with this child. And when you think about that kind of lack of experience of not even being able to read to the children, but not having even these, what we consider to be our culture books or knowledge of those stories in our head. And I know in talking with Dr. Hess, she has some stories in here in Fort Wayne that she's talked about with me of families that she has seen that she could tell the same stories. Okay, in the book, Meaningful Differences by Hart and Risley, which is just full of information that illustrates the points that I'm making today. I'll just talk about one example. They reported research regarding recorded conversations in professional, working class, and welfare family homes, which was done over a 2.5-year period. And one of the findings was that there was a difference between the professional and welfare parents of 300 words per hour that they used with their children. The professional families used 300 more words per hour on average with their children than the welfare families. And this is the more startling point, that the professional families' children at age 3 had larger vocabularies than the welfare parents had themselves. Another study by Jana Mason, looking at families' homes, she found that there were no alphabet materials available for preschoolers in the homes of about half of the welfare families she studied. I mean, no print whatsoever. Toys with alphabets, books, reading materials, anything where the children could actually experience the alphabet. I have this question at the top, what is a leaf? And I'm interspersing with some of my personal experiences. I have extensive experience in working in Head Start and screening children for speech and language disorders at the beginning of the school year. So every year we screen about 5,000 Head Start children. And we have in the past and periodically used the Flu-Hardy speech and language screening test, which actually was developed at the University of Cincinnati by one of my students. And when we give this test, it has been absolutely incredible how consistently children in inner city poverty areas fail to know what a leaf is. The leaf is one of the items on the test. And another item is a feather. And the children almost never know what a leaf or a feather is. They usually call the leaf a flower or a tree. So they know what it is, they have a concept of it, but they don't have the vocabulary item to be able to identify what a leaf is, which fits in with the research that I'm saying here. Shirley Bryce Heath, who is a researcher at Stanford, tape recorded 500 hours over, well, she was examining verbal interactions in homes. And in one home where she recorded over 500 hours over 2 years to examine the verbal interactions. In one low-income home, a low-income urban home, this mother initiated, can you believe this, informational language interaction with her 3 preschool children 18 times in 2 years. The enormity of the difference of kinds of language experiences that these children have is just incredible. And that, of course, there are language interactions going on, but they are mostly prohibitive and directional kinds of languages. Do this, do that, or lots and lots of don't do this and don't do that. Now, I asked the question, how can you have fun when you're depressed? Another personal example I have, Dr. Hess had talked with me about being involved in the Healthy Families Project here in Fort Wayne. We have a similar project in Cincinnati called Every Child Succeeds. And this is a program for at-risk children based on the fact that their mothers are at risk because of being very young, under 16, being in poverty, on welfare, being on drugs or alcohol, not having any prenatal care. And this program in Cincinnati just recently came to us. We were thrilled to want to do some things to enhance the language and literacy of the children in the program. And so myself and my colleague Joanne Prindeville met with them, and Joanne was saying, as we discussed, as we talked, she said, well, one of the things that I would really like for these mothers to understand is to get the idea that this isn't something that you do, that it's a job. You don't have to, it's not work. You don't have to sit down and work with your children. This is fun. This is something that you have toys, and we want to bring in books and toys that are associated with the book so that moms can see that you can read this book and you can play with these toys, and it's really fun. And the psychologist on the team said, you know, that's great and fine, but he said, you need to understand how many of these mothers are actually depressed or under enormous stress, and that many of these mothers don't see that children laughing and children talking is actually fun, that those kinds of child behaviors, getting excited and laughing and talking, are negative behaviors to mothers who may be depressed. And so when you think of that aspect, in addition to not knowing what to do, but not really being able to deal with child laughter and child fun, that compounds our problem. Another story I want to tell you, and as I said, I've had, one of the things that we pin a lot of our hopes on is the Head Start program. And I think we all know that we have mixed results of Head Start. On the one hand, it's one of our finest things. We have so many children that are having the chance to participate in early school experiences. And many, many Head Start programs are just providing wonderful programs. And yet, on the other hand, we have mixed results on whether or not Head Start is really getting children ready for school, and whether children actually come out of Head Start in a different school readiness skills than children who don't go to Head Start. And of course, one of the things that we know is that part of the problem or the issue is the incredible importance of school. But we also know that we have a lot of work to do to be sure that our Head Start programs are high quality, and lots of training of teachers to do when we know that some of our Head Start teachers are not well trained, A, and B, come from the communities and from the culture in which the children live, and therefore may have some of the same ideas about how we do or how we don't talk to children and whether and what's important. And an example that I share with you from a Head Start program that I was in recently, I was there observing one of the, a young therapist in my practice, and first-year therapist in my practice. And she was doing a wonderful language experience with a group of children on the floor, and modeling for the teacher how to do this, how to provide a strong language experience through a book. And the teacher was there watching, and there was this one little boy who was just so into this, and he was like raising his hand for every answer, and he was ready with every answer, and he was asking questions, and he was scooching up to try to point to the picture and ask what it was, and what's that, and I know, and look at that, there's a boat, and all the things that we really want kids to do when they're excited about books. And the teacher called him down a couple of times because he was being naughty in her view by interrupting and participating and not waiting to be called on. And she called him down like twice, and then finally she just removed him from the group and took him over and said he couldn't participate anymore, and he crawled under a table and spent the rest of the time of the whole session under a table. So I present this not because it's a condemnation of Head Start, but to say that the differences between what some folks understand about high quality interactions with children and what some folks see as the importance of being good. I can give another Head Start example I have is a situation where the children were cleaning up from after eating lunch, and the children were supposed to clean up, and then they were supposed to go to circle time, and they were supposed to wait. And they had to wait to start circle time until all the children had cleaned up, and all the children were sitting in the circle ready to learn. Well, you can imagine what happened, because as soon as some children were quiet and were waiting for the other children to get there, the children had been waiting, couldn't wait any longer, and so they were running around, and so now we were waiting, some other children are waiting, and this group was never going to be quiet. But the rule in this teacher's mind, the important thing was to be sure that everything was orderly and the children were obedient, as opposed to understanding the need for children to interact and to get this language into them. The other question I have is, so we have really significant teacher education issues if we're going to support children in Head Start to learn. And the other question is, as I alluded to, can schools solve the problem? Some of the evidence suggests that we aren't going to be able to solve the problems if we aren't going to make real significant headways into homes. Okay, so having given all these dire statistics and all these dire and sad stories, what is it that we know about how literacy develops and what we need to be doing to support children for literacy? Okay, so just basic facts. The National Literacy Act of 1991 defines literacy as an individual's ability to read, write, and speak in English, and compute and solve problems at levels of proficiency necessary to function on the job and in society, to achieve one's goal and to develop one's knowledge and potential. What we know then about how children get to that level of literacy and how children acquire what we call literacy. I said this before, that one thing we know is that emergent literacy skills in kindergarten are strong predictors of fourth grade reading ability, and we talked earlier about the fact that fourth grade reading ability predicts success or reading ability into adulthood. So we know that we have to start early. Russ Whitehurst, who is the Undersecretary, the U.S. Department of Education Undersecretary for Research in Education, also presented at the White House Conference on Literacy. And I also will mention that both Susan Newman and Russ Whitehurst are coming to our national convention in Atlanta to present, and we're excited about that. Russ Whitehurst in this research talks about what it is that children need to have, or what kinds of skills are needed and what kinds of skills predict reading success. So he talked about what he called inside-out skills and outside-in skills. Inside-out skills are the building blocks of reading. It's decoding skills, alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, word awareness. If we're talking about writing, being able to print the letters, to know that you read from left to right and you write from left to right, being able to write on a straight line. Those kinds of what I call splinter skills. And then outside-in skills are the global, the information comprehension, world knowledge, ability to understand the language, ability to understand discourse, ability to carry on a conversation and get meaning out of the larger chunks of information. Well, Russ Whitehurst found that inside-out skills, the building blocks, at pre-K, predicted reading success in second grade with 85% accuracy. Whereas the outside-in skills were not such a good predictor of actual reading ability in grade 2. However, and this is a building thing here, outside-in skills at pre-K predicted outside-in skills in grades 2 and 3 at 94% accuracy. So if children were able to comprehend at pre-K, they were able to comprehend information in grades 2 and 3. So the third thing, however, then is, and this is the catch, that the third grade reading comprehension was more closely related to outside-in skills. And this is important because in early grades, sometimes we look at only those decoding skills. And decoding basically can predict decoding, because that's what you do in second grade, is that the most important thing about reading in second grade may be to actually be able to read the text out loud. But when children get to third grade and they begin to be expected to use what they can read in order to get information, they now need this global world knowledge stuff. Anyway, his conclusion is that you have to have both. And what we then need to do is to expose children to both things during the preschool years. Lots and lots of information and talking and sharing exciting things, as well as exposure to print and using books that support rhyming and phonological awareness and all those things too. Okay, so what does this mean as an example of outside in? Here's an outside in task. What does this mean? What do you have to know in order to read this sentence if you could decode all the words and you could pronounce it and you can say Leonard Bernstein has been called the Pied Piper of Carnegie Hall? But what do you have to know? What does your world knowledge have to be? You have to know who Leonard Bernstein is, and as a little aside, I have to say that I've been using this sentence for quite a few years. And it was just last year, for the first year, that I had only one student in my first year graduate class who knew who Leonard Bernstein was. So those of you students here, if you don't know who Leonard Bernstein is, you're with the rest of folks your age, and it's just us old fogies. Leonard Bernstein, however, is a famous composer and conductor. Okay, what else do you have to know? You have to know what Carnegie Hall is and where Carnegie Hall is. And what its place in the music world is. And then you have to know the story of the Pied Piper and how the children were led and the rats were led by the Pied Piper. And if you don't have that musical world knowledge, and if you don't have that literacy story knowledge, then the sentence makes absolutely no sense at all. Now here's, in contrast, another example, and this is an example of the decoding or the knowledge of the specific knowledge or decoding knowledge that we need to read. Okay, so who knows what it says? If you were getting, okay. Once upon a time, there was a little girl went. Okay, once upon a time there was a little girl named Goldilocks. One day she went for a walk in the woods. Okay, well, what are all the things that you have to know how to do this? First of all, as a matter of fact, the first skill, the first thing you have to be able to do is really a global and outside-in task. Because if you don't know how a story, a fairy tale might begin, you're never going to get started. It's this getting started with once upon a time. And if you don't know the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, you are surely never going to come up with Goldilocks as the word in that I can't point to because I keep pointing at my computer screen. So you would never know, you would never come up with that. But in addition then to the world knowledge that you have to have in order to get through this story and have a sense, in order to predict what it likely is, you also have to know spelling and the arrangement of vowels and consonants. You have to be able to spell. You have to know how words are structured. You have to know the sentence. You have to know the syntax because that's another predictor of like if there, when you say once upon a time there, then you know the next word is likely to be was. One of the interesting things down here, and it's easier if I can predict, when it said one day she went, and a lot of times when people are doing this, they'll say went to, because that's a logical syntactic sequence that you would go, and then they look back and they say, oh, there are 3 letters and it has to be something else. So anyway, all of those systems, both the world, the big picture systems, the outside in and the inside out decoding knowledge, enables you to read this sentence or this paragraph or without very much information at all. Okay, so knowing what we know or those things about what children need for literacy, what is the relationship between spoken and literacy learning? And this is, of course, is why I'm here, because it's spoken language that gets us started on this road to literacy, and the relationship to it is how a speech-language pathologist gets involved in literacy. I had the opportunity to hear Hollis Scarborough speak at an NIH conference, and she has done a lot of research looking at predictors for school readiness. She examined preschool predictors of reading success in a more looking at lots and lots of scores and looking at children's scores and ability and performance on specific tasks like phonological awareness, word awareness, alphabet knowledge, all of the things that we would look at for school readiness. And she also then looked at language skills, and she used a lot of different tests and looked at a lot of different studies actually that had used various ways to look at language or at reading readiness. And so by using her own data and collecting the data that the research had been done and looking through at regression analysis, she showed that from all these studies, the language-related measures appeared to be the strongest predictors of reading success, more so than the phonological awareness ones and even actually IQ when that was put into the pot. So it comes out over and over again that children's language skills at school are the biggest predictor. So what we know is then that spoken language provides a foundation for the development of reading and writing, and we've got to get kids with rich language skills at the preschool years. We also know that spoken and written language have a reciprocal relationship in that each builds on the other to result in language and literacy competence starting early and continuing into childhood. So that when we support children in having writing experiences and having reading experiences and also having writing experiences, that supports their language learning also. We know that instruction in spoken language can result in growth in written language, and instruction in written language can result in growth in spoken language. We also know that children with spoken language problems frequently have difficulty learning to read and write, and that orally language and children with reading and writing problems frequently have difficulty with spoken language. And we also know that children who have language problems in preschool and that are often appear to have been, quote, cured or outgrown their language problems are children who are very likely going to may turn up later with written language problems, with reading problems, and other problems in school. And as I said, that's why I'm really here, because this is what speech-language pathologists really do, is support those children with written or with oral language problems. But this relationship between written language problems and oral language problems is so critical that a major thing that we have to do is support children with language problems in learning language in the big picture. We also know that individuals with reading and writing problems may also experience difficulties in using language strategically to communicate and to think and to learn, and therefore the implications for school are enormous, and this is why these children are called learning disabled. The Matthew effect is really critical here. Poor readers don't read as much as good readers, and they have less opportunity to acquire linguistic knowledge from reading. And so then, over time, they have reduced exposure to literate language, and that can lead poor readers to experience other language problems. One example is difficulty with figurative language, that so many of the figurative language expressions that we use come from literature, and we get them from reading, and they're related to references to literate language, like the Pied Piper example. And so when you don't read, you don't have exposure to those kinds of literate things, and you also don't have exposure to the more complex syntax that we use in writing and reading than we use in oral language. And in addition, this world knowledge that I talked about with the Pied Piper thing supports reading comprehension, but then poor reading comprehension prevents acquisition of new world knowledge, so much of which we get through reading. It's just incredible the amount of information we get and how reduced our information is if we don't read. I want to tell you another story about a wonderful book by Gordon Wells called The Meaning Makers. And he calls it a story himself, although it happens to be the result of an enormous research project that was carried out in Bristol, England. He recorded the homes of 128 children. And it was over like almost a 5-year period. They were entered into the study as early as 15 months, and they recorded until they were 5 years old, no matter what time they were entered into the study. And in addition to recording these children in their home, and recording like just hours and hours and hours and hours of type. They had automatic tape recorders that just came on so that they could get random samples of what was going on in the home. They collected tons and tons of demographic data. They collected data like how many people lived in the home, what their incomes were, what kind of jobs they had, whether or not both parents worked, what other people lived in the home, how many children they had, what the ages of the children were, whether the children went to preschool, whether they went to daycare, who the primary caregiver was, how many hours they spent in babysitters, everything you could possibly think of. And then they looked at the correlation between the factors that they had in the demographic data and what they saw in the homes and children's oral language skills at age 5. And what they found was, incredibly, that there wasn't anything from any of their demographic data that accurately predicted the rank order or the children's oral language skills at age 5. The only thing they found was the fact that there were instances of interactive, child-initiated, teachable moment conversations between adults and children. And it really wasn't the amount, it was the fact that they occurred, because the fact that it wasn't, parents who worked and parents who didn't work, that didn't matter. It was the fact that these teachable moments occurred. And there were things like the reason his book is such a wonderful story is because he gives examples and examples. And one of the examples might be that the child, mom's cooking in the kitchen and the child's just sitting up on the counter right there, eye level, face to face, where the child can talk to mom and mom can talk back. And the child looks out the window and says, "See Birdie?" And mom says, "Oh yeah, I see that Birdie. I wonder what he's doing out there." the child says, I don't know. And she said, well, I wonder why he's bringing all those sticks and strings over to the tree branch. You think maybe he's making a nest, you think? And the child says, what's a nest? And Mom says, well, a nest is where Mom makes a home so that the babies can live there and grow there, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, the point is that first of all, it's the child initiated. If Mom sat down today and said, today is the day we're going to learn about a nest, and the kid is like off playing something else, who cares? But the thing is child initiated, and at that moment when the child saw something that interested him in a nest, then Mom turned that into a teachable moment to teach about nests. And that's what he found to be the only factor that was related to children's oral language skills at age 5. Now, the next thing was, however, that he followed 32 of those children through elementary school to examine the relationship of what he saw at kindergarten to school success. And actually, although those children with oral language skills were successful in school, they weren't necessarily the most successful children in school. Now, this is not the good news. But then we said, well, why would this be? Why wouldn't these children, after everything I've said today, who had the best oral language skills at age 5, why wouldn't they be the most successful in school? And so he went back to examine then what were the factors that predicted school success. And the factor that predicted school success was very closely related but not the same, and it was interactive book reading. And the reason, of course, and so that's what mothers sitting down or parents sitting down with children and doing just what I said before, but doing it associated with books. And the reason, of course, is that the oral language kids weren't the most successful ones, is that he went and he looked to see what was happening in school to try to figure that out. And what he found was that oral language facility, just like in that Head Start, hopefully not just like, but in a similar way to that Head Start classroom I described, was not the thing that was most valued. So for example, reading is the way that children have to show what reading and writing show what they can do in school. So for example, there might be this child who was like way up here at the oral language skills at age 5. And so the teacher in 3rd grade or whatever says, who discovered America? And this kid raises his hand and he says, well, my dad told me about this guy in England who knew that the world was round, and he wanted to go out and show that the world was round, but he couldn't get any ships. He couldn't afford any ships because he didn't have any money. So he didn't get to go. But if he had had more money and his queen or king would have given him money, he would have been able to go and find out the world was round. And the teacher says, well, that's fine, but who discovered America? And Susie Q raises her hand and says, Christopher Columbus. So, part of the issue here is what teachers have time for and can deal with, or what teachers are ready to accept. As a speech language pathologist, we would think that would be the best story we could ever hear. But in class, some teachers, it depends on the teacher, but it also depends a lot on what teachers are able to accept in terms of children's language. So knowing the rules of school is another issue, but also being able to express what you know in writing is a different issue. Okay, so that's Gordon Wells' story. All right, so we know a lot of things. What do we know about emergent readers to summarize here? We know that emergent readers have these things. They know why we read and write. They build background knowledge and concepts. They develop concepts about print. They develop phonemic awareness. They learn some concrete words. They know some letter names and sounds, and they want to learn to read and write. Now, this one thing that I said, one of the things I said is emergent readers and writers know why we read and write. And so if that's one of the things, if they know why we read and write, then that is a really big factor of what has to happen at home. And learning to read and early and easily is associated with 4 home factors. The home includes a range of print materials. Adults and older children are readers. Children have access to writing materials, and people in the home respond to the child's reading and writing efforts. There are just, I'm going to just now go through a number of overheads here that have lists and lists of things that tell parents and grandparents and adults the fun and exciting things that they can do in homes. We know that young children's language development thrives when the atmosphere around oral language is warm and rewarding, when language occurs in a social, child-centered context, when the context for language is meaningful, when children are presented with the whole language system at once, when adults talk to children in chunks. And we know that children learn the language system and how to use it at the same time when they actually communicate for meaning. So the role of adults is critical in supporting interaction and modeling learning for children. We know that we must work together to ensure that young children have opportunities to participate in emergent language activities both at home and in preschool. And we know that we can't always fix the problem after children enter school, so we have to do it early. Okay, I'm not going to tell you all the things, I'm not going to go through with you all the things here that are on this overhead, but it's a list of the wonderful and fun things that we can do to encourage shared book reading, to encourage shared talk, and focus on print and pictures and have fun with rhyming and alliteration and predictable stories, to point out logos and signs and street signs and familiar words, to help to give children opportunities to just draw and print and get the idea of how books work and how print works and directionality, to do nursery rhymes and finger plays and chants and songs, to name letters and point them out in books and sort games of letters and making lists of words, to use wordless picture books and predictable stories and books with familiar daily sequences of events. All of those things are things that seem so fun to us to be able to do, to show children that we read that as adults, and to have children as helpers, to let them play with materials. And also, well, let me just go back. Whoops, skipped one, I think, sorry. And to share books with children. What is our role is to help families know the joy of doing those things that seem so fun and natural. And I mean, I just whipped through those because those aren't things that I need to tell you about doing. Those are things that we all do naturally with our children. We have opportunities today, because of the Bush administration initiatives, to take some new opportunities to work on the literacy problem. The Bush administration initiatives has offered new funding opportunities through the Early Reading First programs and the Reading First programs, which are K through 3 programs for states to get involved with, and the Early Reading First programs. And no matter what your politics are, these are opportunities that we need to take advantage of because they're there. These are pictures of the materials, the wonderful materials that are available for Reading First and Early Reading First. We know that there is a literacy focus now because of the people that have been put in place in the Department of Education and NIH who are really strong and well-respected reading researchers. We know, as I said before, that there have been a number of conferences that have focused on literacy. And so the question is, how can we collaborate at the local level to take advantage of these opportunities that we have right now? And as I said, politics don't count. We've got to grab onto those funding opportunities as much as we can. So what is needed to support literacy in a culture of poverty is family literacy, parent education, developing a culture of literacy, assuring that we have balanced instruction in our schools, assuring that we have the highest quality of teachers, improving teacher education, especially in Head Start, and creating Head Start programs that really support literacy. And this is going to take the collaboration of all those groups that can address this problem, taking advantage of the funding resources and new funding resources that are available to us today. so that we can have funding for education and resources for families to learn how to support literacy and allow families to have the time and energy that they need for this rather than only thinking about putting food on the table. We need educators to teach teachers and we need educators to teach teachers and also the teachers of teachers and the teachers of families. We need preschool programs to do a better job of teacher education, and we need language and literacy specialists and researchers to provide language support for children and the research-based educational practices that we need. So this is my vision. My vision of a literacy-rich school environment is one that supports, my vision of an environment that supports literacy is a culture where children can flourish and acquire skills for success in language and literacy. The culture has the flexibility to be responsive to the needs of all children, including those who are typically developing, those who are at risk for educational difficulties, those who have identified disabilities, and those who do not speak English. This culture emerges from a facilitative teaching environment that reflects a knowledge base grounded in research and modified on teacher-collected evidence. It implements a meaningful curriculum that expands children's world knowledge and promotes growth in language and linguistic awareness. It reflects a professional view of that teachers have of themselves as educators and teacher researchers. And it supports families to provide literacy-rich homes. That's my vision of a literacy-rich school environment. And my message is that we are all teachers, whether that happens to be our specific profession or degree, and we are all responsible for supporting children because it's our culture that they would live in. Thank you. Okay, I used up my whole hour. But anyway, are there some questions or comments? Yes?
How do you get the parent who doesn't have a book in their home to buy into the importance of this? How do you even reach those people? And secondly, if those people are themselves not literate, how do you handle it?
Is everybody hear the question? So how do you get people who don't even have a book in their home to buy into it, and how do you support those families who are not literate? And actually, I mean, it's just an enormous problem. I do think that some of the programs, like the one here, the Healthy Families Program and the Every Child Succeeds program in Cincinnati, are some examples of ways that we can reach families. There are really lots of programs, when I say lots, not nearly enough to reach every single family, but there are programs that provide books for families. There's a program, a really neat program, I can't think of the name of it, where, and some of you may know, where pediatricians have books in homes, in their offices, and share them with...
Reach out and read.
Reach out and read. Thanks. Where pediatricians have books, and so when mothers bring their children for baby or for whatever reason they come, that they take books home, and also part of it is training pediatricians to share the book and actually read with the child, and so that to demonstrate for the mom to read with the child. So that's one thing. And then the other one, which we have every child succeeds, that you have Healthy Families, where workers are going into the homes, and actually a big focus of those programs for health and safety, but those workers are taking books into the homes, and what Dr. Hess was involved in here, and what I just recently had the opportunity to get involved in, is helping those individuals who may be nurses, may be social workers, may be other kinds of individuals or other kinds of training, to be sure that they have the skills to support the parents in how to read their children. Now, so those are some ways of getting books into homes, and libraries are doing outreach things like that too. There are a number of examples that I've heard going out and trying to be close to families and getting books. So I think one thing is buying books and getting them into the homes. Now, the issue of families not being able to read, I still think that the sharing of books can be done. This is when I told you that story about Tinkerbell. Well, in one sense, it was really sad that the mother couldn't read the book, but in fact, that she and the child were sitting there with the book together, turning page by page, so the child was seeing that there was something interesting in this book, seeing how to turn the page, seeing how to deal with books, and actually having information about the pictures and relating to it. So even in that situation where that mom couldn't read, language and literacy things were happening. But there's a long way to go. It's a big task. Well, somebody else has something to share about what you've done too. I know Lucy has so many good stories about her family she's worked with. Other questions? Yeah.
That research suggests that a lot of things have to happen before we legally require children to be in school. Are you suggesting that we change that rule? You talked a lot about preschool, and preschool is voluntary.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that. I really don't have an answer to that. Certainly because I am not, the answer is not in my mind about how much we really are changing the nurture thing regarding, how can I say this? The information is not in about what Head Start is really doing. And I don't want to be a Head Start basher in any way, because I think it's great. I want it there. But I don't think we know enough about whether or not preschool can overcome lack of experience in the home to say whether we should have mandatory preschool. I don't know enough about it. I shouldn't say we don't know enough about it. I don't know enough about it. So I don't think I would be willing to go there. Something else in the answer to these questions? Because I'm not the only one. Yeah.
In my work with First Steps families, and many of them are low-income or poverty-based families, and there are very few books in those homes. I've had the occasion where two of my families have changed how they looked at a book and what they did with the child with the book based on things that I had done in therapy weeks before with books. So that's, I think, if we can encourage those people who are working very early intervention in the birth to 3 area, and to get books into the home, even if you just take them in and read them with the child and talk about the pictures and those kind of things, even if you have to take your books out with you. I hate doing that, but sometimes you have to, because you come back the next week and the books have been left out on the sidewalk and they've gotten rained on and they're ruined. We can give some families a little bit of instruction just through our modeling.
And maybe that what she says is another answer that I might give to your question is, should we be putting our efforts in mandatory preschool or putting our efforts into efforts to change what happens at home, or both, but that would be another way to look at it, and where we're putting our time and effort and money. Yeah.
It's not just preschools and Head Starts that see these children, though, because so many of our children now in this country are in some form of daycare from a very early age. And so influencing the mostly women who work in these daycares and various programs, who are also parents and who turn over all the time, but in reaching them just as we're trying to reach parents to influence them is the best way to reach them early. And I guess I'd like to go on and say, I'm the person who started the book program for Healthy Families 7 years ago and provided all the books for them and did the initial training of the caseworkers and all the other home visitation programs in Fort Wayne based on the model of Reach Out and Read, which I'd started here in the clinics. And in some of the initial work with that program, first of all, we didn't start giving the books into the homes, but the Healthy Families homes, until the babies were 6 months old, because that's what the Reach Out and Read program says to start with. And the books weren't going out very fast at all, and we found out that a lot of the mothers it's a voluntary program, and they had dropped out by the time their baby was 6 months old. So we quickly got 5 more books and started in the first month. And then the retention rate increased. The retention rate in those programs is something that they use to measure the success of the program because they want to keep those mothers letting the caseworker come so that they can continue to help in all different aspects of her life. It turns out that the book was one of the most important things that kept the moms in the program because they loved receiving the books. We also had them do a survey in the very beginning of it, and one of the questions at the end was, how well does this mom read? And I had, I think, 4, no trouble at all, some trouble, a fair amount of trouble, but able to handle these books because, after all, the books you're picking for reading to babies don't have a lot of words. They're not good choices for babies that think about it. And a lot of trouble and can't do it. Out of maybe 100 of those surveys, there were less than 10, maybe 5, that had that bottom category. I was very surprised. One of my conclusions was that it's more young men than young women who have real reading difficulties. But the reading level in the books, when we talk about adults, these young moms with real reading difficulties, it's not in very many cases that they can't read at all. So they are able to.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I think those programs that are just wonderful programs. The point you made about daycare is really critical, and I sort of never use those words, but daycare is so critical. But the number of the Head Start programs that I'm really talking about and working with are programs where Head Start is supporting children in daycare programs, and so some of the experiences I'm talking about are really in daycare programs, and I should make that point because, of course, that's critical, and even much even more critical with the welfare issues and moms going back to work who were on welfare before, so now those children are in daycare, and that's really a place where we have to get and also daycare workers aren't educated like as preschool teachers too, so getting there is really critical. And I would look at that in almost the same way looking at getting to families. Yeah.
I have an actual question. All those researchers that you talked about that I was familiar with, or a lot of them in the government now, Susan Midland and Whitehurst and also Griffin, they all say all the right things about the importance of the joy of books and sharing the story and reading interactively and all of that. And I think Laura Bush feels that way, and I've been excited about the early reading first proposals and all that. But when it actually comes down to it, some of what I'm seeing makes it sound like the people making the actual decisions on these grants are going back to saying, but what are they going to do in the classroom? And we've got to get rid of, there was just something this weekend in the Tribune about the kindergarten teachers being all upset because they're being told they've got to throw out the toys and the blocks and the doll corner, and they have to start working on early reading stuff. And someone at some level then is interpreting this in what I personally think is the wrong way. Do you see any of that?
No, I think it's extremely. I mean, I actually was writing a talk, I'm like, am I going to go there or am I going to ignore this? Because you can't do everything in one talk. But the issue of high stakes testing and, is just antithetical to what the teachers are pressed to get kids ready for high stakes testing. And if that's what they're asking in school, then they're not going to be doing these enriching things. They're going to be teaching them the skill stuff. And read line is in my mind. I get mixed messages there too, because you hear these things, and those are the things I was going to say, but then you hear read line and another breath talking about it's all phonological awareness, and so there's no question they're mixed messages, and that's kind of why I put my whole politics thing in there too, just like take what's good out of it and grow with it. But I find that to be a very frustrating issue. How can you say these things and talk about these things and then talk about high stakes testing? And then of course there's a whole phonics and whole language controversy that is all those educational controversies. I just sort of made a decision I couldn't go there with educational controversies, but I can go there afterwards.
So one comment to follow up with the daycare. I think one of the concerns has always been about daycare that it's a wonderful thing, we need to have it, but there's no curriculum, there's no real program set up. And maybe one of the things in terms of what we can look to do is to try to put a little bit more of the reading, read stories, do things with children a little bit more in a daycare setting, encourage the people who run the daycares. There are training programs that they do have to go to have their licenses to keep the daycare going, and perhaps to stress a little bit more of the reading for fun. Not necessarily reading to pass a test, but reading for fun. And one other comment, because I did participate after some of the books were going into the homes, into some of the healthy family homes. One of the things that was really fascinating to me is we were looking at the quality of language that was coming from the parent and also from the child as the mothers were interacting with the children, was that the few times that the mother picked up a book was the best talk that the mother did. And it gave the child a chance to talk, and then to hear the best language from the child. Whereas the rest was directive, the child had very little opportunity to initiate. When the story came out, whether they were reading or not reading, even if they were just looking at the pictures, the language level was really better. And that, of course, we want to raise the balance of more of that, so if we could have more time reading and more time sharing. And the second part I wanted to say was the other time that children's language was better and the mother's language was better was when they did play, when they pretended to cook something or go shopping. And then the child could sort of direct and initiate the interaction as well. And so I think it's a matter of looking at maybe the types of things we engage in, not necessarily always to do just the reading part, and to strive for that balance of the inside out and the outside in. Getting those two components is really important.
I read a wonderful study 7 years ago and then lost the reference to it. I've gone on listservs and asked people if they know the study, and no one's ever recognized it. I don't think I dreamt it, but let me just tell you because it fits with that. Took a group of mothers with their toddlers, and in 3 different situations in random order, in an empty room, taped every word the mother said in 10 minutes. And the 3 situations were once with a toy, once with nothing in the room, and once with a picture book. And then they entered every word she said. And no matter the education level of the parent, that's the crucial thing, from uneducated to extremely educated, all the moms used much more complex language when talking about the pictures in the book than in either of the other situations.
It's the scaffolding.
Yeah,
the scaffolding in the
opens a
book gives you
world.
something to talk about.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing this with me. Thank you for coming out and also for sharing some ideas with me.
Let me do this. Well, on behalf of the School of Arts and Sciences, I'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation for this evening's lecture, and invite you, and I believe all of us, to a bit of a reception. Oh yes, and we also have the plaque where all of the speakers, I believe this is the 26th of these lectures, so you're inscribed for posterity on the plaque there, which is mounted, where does that live? That lives up in my office somewhere, I think, up in the Arts and Sciences. But I'd like to invite you and all of us to a bit of a reception. I think it's just outside, I hope, right after the lecture, and thank you.